everybody. I'm Amanda, one of Mrs. Hill's history helpers. Today we will be reading Chapter 4, Fencing the Homestead. Imagine, you are settled on a farm in Kansas. You've worked hard, your crops are thriving, you're pleased with yourself. Then a cowpuncher decides to drive his herd to market, and though you're not right on the Chisholm Trail, you're near enough. The herd stampedes and longhorns trample your land. Wham! Bang! Squash! You have no crops, nothing left of a year's work, and maybe no farm, because without a crop to sell, you don't have money to buy more seed and supplies. That kind of thing happened. It was just one of the things that discouraged farming in the Plains states. The early pioneers and the 49ers, who headed to California when the gold rush started in 1849, leapfrogged over the plains and mountains and settled in the far west. They called the plains the Great American Desert and believed it was no good for farming. They were wrong. The region would become one of the best agricultural areas the world has ever known. But they were right about one thing. It wasn't an easy place to be a farmer. There were hardly any trees and not enough water. The soil was wonderfully rich. The pioneers found native grasses tall enough to hide a man on horseback. But the weather was either blisteringly hot or frigidly cold, with tornadoes thrown in just to keep people on their toes. Besides that, there were invasions of grasshoppers that ate crops, droughts that dried them up, and a loneliness on the open plains that drove some people mad. None of that seemed to matter. The dream of many Americans was to have a farm. Land in the East was spoken for. Even with problems, those vast plains looked inviting to people who wanted land of their own. Winds blew much of the time, which meant that windmills could be used to pump water from deep wells. That water made irrigation possible. In 1862, which was during the Civil War, Congress passed a bill called the Homestead Act. It said that for $10 any citizen, or anyone who had filed papers to become a citizen, could have 160 acres of public land. That included women. As soon as the Civil War was over, a lot of people headed west to get land and become farmers. Some say 250,000 widows and single women were among those who became homesteaders. Many homesteaders were immigrants, right off the boat. Some western settlements became all German, or all Danish, or all Swedish, or all Norwegian. Many immigrants tried to hang on to their original culture. Food was one way to do it. Greek, Polish, German, or Italian food was found in surprising places. The newcomers didn't have to worry about buffalo herds anymore. The buffalo were practically gone, but they did have the problem of cattle wandering about. They couldn't fence their land because there were no trees to make fence posts. Besides, wooden fences rotted, or got knocked over, or burned. Joseph Glidden solved their problem. He invented barbed wire. He experimented in his backyard with an old coffee mill and a big grindstone that turned. He used them to twist two wires together, and then he coiled sharp barbs around the wires. With barbed wire, farmers could fence in their property. Now the cowboys had a problem. Those fences got in the way of their herds. Well, cowboys and farmers did some fighting, but before long the farmers and ranchers won. The cattle drives were over, and most cowboys turned into ranch hands. By 1890, railroads seemed to be about everywhere, so the cattle drives weren't necessary anyway. Railroads meant farmers and ranchers could send their cattle and grains to faraway markets. A new kind of agriculture developed on the plains. The early American farms had been self-sufficient. The farmer took care of most of his own needs. Farm families raised cows, hogs, and chickens, grew wheat and vegetables, killed game, caught fish, built their own homes, and made their own furniture and clothes. They didn't have much use for money. They bartered for the few things they needed. Self-sufficient farming wasn't suited to the plains area or to the times. In the 19th century, agriculture became a big business. Many farmers became specialists who grew only one or two crops. It happened quickly. For thousands and thousands of years, men and women had used the same methods of sowing and harvesting. Then a few inventions came along and changed everything.